Welcome to Inside the Issues. I'm Amrit Singh. The road to the White House almost certainly runs through Pennsylvania, and both presidential campaigns are acting like it. Today, former President Donald Trump held two events in Pennsylvania. Vice President Kamala Harris set to campaign there on Wednesday. Taylor Poplar's reports from Pennsylvania, where the race for its 19 electoral votes remains extremely tight.
Donald Trump narrowly won here in Pennsylvania in 2016, then narrowly lost in 2020. Part of his campaign strategy this time around is to try to turn out as many voters as possible in deeply Republican areas, which is why Trump came here to the small community of Smithton, southeast of Pittsburgh, to take part in a roundtable about farming.
We're being ripped off at levels that nobody's ever seen before, and this administration has allowed it to happen.
The roundtable focused on an issue Republicans have raised in many states, the threat China allegedly poses to U.S. agriculture. Pennsylvania farmers explained their concerns about rising prices and China purchasing U.S. farms, though government data shows that Chinese companies only own a tiny amount of American farmland. Trump pledged to lower energy costs and threatened companies like John Deere with 200% tariffs if they build products in other countries. Many economists, though, say his tariff plan actually would end up costing Americans more. Trump supporters at the event told us the economy is why they're backing the former president.
I think Trump on a dollars and cents basis is the best choice to run our country.
I think it's mostly work. It's people not having jobs.
In downtown Smithton, we found some Kamala Harris signs in this overwhelmingly Republican county.
I believe in democracy, and she's for the people.
He's just arrogant, so that's why I don't like him.
Trump left from this roundtable to hold a rally about an hour northeast of here. He's also scheduled to campaign this week in the battleground states of Georgia, Michigan, and North Carolina. Reporting in Smithton, Pennsylvania, Taylor Poplar's Spectrum News.
Well, a new national poll from NBC News shows Harris with a 5-point lead over Trump. That's within that margin of error, but it's a shift. That same poll showed Trump with a 2-point lead over President Joe Biden in July, before Biden announced that he would leave the race after that fateful debate. And another survey out today shows Trump ahead in 3 of the so-called Sun Belt states. The New York Times Siena poll shows the former president leading in Arizona, Georgia. He lost both in 2020. Harris trails by 2 points in North Carolina, which is within the margin of error. The moral of this polling story, it's looking like it's going to be tight, which makes every battleground state all the more important. And with us now is an expert from a state that matters. It's Nevada's Jon Ralston, CEO and editor at the Nevada Independent. And I say it matters because, as Jon Ralston says, we matter. And it seems like the presidential campaign's listening to you. Welcome to the show, Jon. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me on.
It's so interesting, especially since you're a guy who knows Nevada well. I mean, I think people who understand politics have seen you talk about this state for years now. And just tell us what we're seeing in this presidential campaign that seems a little different from the past.
Well, I mean, of course, this whole year is different, right? Because of Biden getting out of the race and Harris suddenly being in the race. Before Biden got out in Nevada, which has shifted a little bit right over the last 2 cycles, Biden was behind outside the margin of error to Trump, and Democrats here were very depressed. But since the switch, the polls have turned around. Even though the New York Times seems to have forgotten that we're in the Sun Belt too, the polling here is very similar. It's very, very close in all the private and public polling that I've seen. And so Harris has turned what looked like a pretty bleak outlook here for the Democrats into a lot of optimism, a lot of volunteers, but the state is still very, very close.
It feels like this whole race is very, very close when it comes down to it. And you're right, folks were looking for Nevada in that New York Times Siena poll because they said it was the Sun Belt. We didn't get any recent polling since the debate there. You have said it's close. Just give the lay of the land to the folks at home. When we talk about these 17 counties there in Nevada, 15 of them go Republican, 2 have gone Democrat in the last 2 elections, but so much of that population is in those 2 counties, right?
Yeah, there's 2 urban areas in Nevada, essentially, and one of them is huge, and that's Clark County, which is where Las Vegas is, which is 2/3 of the vote. Then you have Washoe County, which is Reno, which is about 10 to 12%. And then the 15 counties you mentioned in between are all very red counties. So for a Republican to win a statewide race in Nevada, the math is pretty simple. You can't lose by too much in the populous area of Clark County, win by landslides in the rural counties, and hold your own in Washoe County. It's a very difficult needle to thread for both both parties now, and you had a split last cycle when the U.S. Senate race was won by a Democrat in a very, very close race, 8,000 votes, but the governor's race was won by a Republican by about 15,000 votes. So less than 1% and 1.5%. Very, very close state. We're a purple state.
Yeah, you say, and the voter registration also tells that story from what we understand. I mean, you tell me and update me, but from what I understand, it's basically pretty split, with a third of the vote being no party preference, or no partisan, as you call it there in Nevada, right?
That's right. And the dynamic of the state has changed. The Democrats used to have a significant statewide lead. It's now under 1%. But the bigger story is what you alluded to, which is non-major party voters now are well over a third, actually, making up close to 40% of the vote. But that's a little bit misleading. There's an automatic voter registration program now in state law. So if you go to the DMV to get your car registered or your driver's license renewed, you're automatically registered as a nonpartisan voter or independent voter if you don't choose to be a Democrat or Republican. So this race is going to be decided by those non-major party voters, and which ones are the real ones. That is, which candidate can find the independents who are really not so independent.
Well, this race is going to be decided by the thinnest of margins, but it may be decided by the economy around the country, and certainly there in Nevada. And there's been national attention on this whole policy coming from former President Trump, but Kamala Harris also, as they say, trying to drink a little milkshake here, also going for this no tax on tips. Such a big idea there in such a service economy-based economy, especially in Clark County, Las Vegas, as you say. Talk about how that issue is rattled around and whether the voters there care whether it's coming first from former President Trump or from Kamala Harris, because both Democratic senators have said the same thing, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right on that. So Trump claims he got this idea for no taxes on tips from a waitress in Las Vegas. And so he has jumped on it. He has started a campaign for people to say no taxes on tips at restaurants and write it on receipts. Harris immediately jumped on board. And as you mentioned, Nevada has 2 Democratic senators. They jumped on board as well. But Trump is really using that as his signature issue here because, as you mentioned, it's a service economy. And the biggest beneficiaries potentially would be members of the Culinary Union, which has a lot of the casino workers and is by far the biggest union. Now, the Culinary Union has endorsed Harris and said Trump can't possibly get this done, and he's all talk, and this is pandering, which all may be true. But if he can penetrate past the leadership into the rank and file and divide them a little bit, that could, as I mentioned earlier, cut down the Democratic margin in Clark County, and that's how he could win the state.
Well, as you say, I mean, Trump's also looking to penetrate in some of his other key issues, and that includes border security, immigration, which is especially interesting because Nevada not technically a border state, yet this, as you have said, is a big issue in Nevada. Explain why.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Obviously, we're not a border state, but we have one of the largest proportionally undocumented worker populations. And so immigration has come up pretty high in polls. Now, listen, nothing compares to the economy in all of the polls that I've seen, and especially the housing crisis here. But immigration does come up. And again, you are talking about certain pockets of voters that could make the difference. Joe Biden won the state by 33,000 votes. So you just turn, 16,500 votes around and Biden wouldn't have won the state. What is going to do it? Is it going to be the no taxes on tips? Is it going to be immigration appealing to base Republican voters? Is it going to be a pro-choice abortion issue that's on the ballot that Democrats hope to drive turnout just enough so they can overcome some of the countervailing forces on the economy and on immigration?
And I know both parties are looking at Latino voters who have outpaced population growth of other demographics, but don't necessarily register or vote at the same rate. So that's a demographic people are looking at. And our last moment there, John, let's just talk about the Senate race. As you mentioned, in 22, that race was decided by just 8,000 votes or so. What are we seeing for this one?
Well, Jackie Rosen, who is a first-termer, has been consistently ahead in polls, ahead of Sam Brown, who was relatively new to the state, who was a disfigured, badly burned war veteran who has an amazing, heroic story to tell, but who doesn't have nearly the money and is not really caught on. But in a purple state, I don't think Jackie Rosen is overconfident. She's ahead in every poll that I've seen outside or close to the margin of error. So she's clearly the favorite, but it will depend on what happens in the last month and a half of this campaign.
It's so true. Well, you know, we used to call some polls the gold standard. We don't know anymore. But when it comes to Nevada, the gold standard is the person we're talking to tonight. Thank you so much for being with us, Jon Ralston. Really appreciate your time today.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We know a little bit more about Nevada now, thanks to Ralston Reports, where you can find there on Twitter, and so much more of his activities there as well. We got more coming up here on ITI. Stay with us. We're just getting started.